watching this guy's content on YouTube for a while, and I figured I'd post a reaction video to, well, one of his videos. This guy is named Dr. Ekberg, and my understanding is that he is a chiropractor, which means that he didn't get his doctorate from an accredited university because chiropractology isn't actually a recognized science. So he calls himself a doctor even though he's not a doctor, and he gives people all of this advice on YouTube, which to me seems to be like some sort of like confirmation bias for people who are like keto or whatever. Anyway, this one interested me because it says that he ate 100 eggs in 7 days. I gotta tell you, I think that's a pretty dubious claim considering the content that I've seen in his channel so far. He presents like a before and after blood work data. Whether or not he actually ate those 100 eggs, I don't know. Maybe my opinion of that will change by the end of the video.
Have you ever wondered what would happen to your cholesterol if you ate 100 eggs in 7 days? Well, I'm about to find out because I'm going to the lab to get my blood drawn. Then I'm going to eat 100 eggs in 7 days. I'm going to get more blood drawn. I'm going to compare the results and I'm going to share them with you.
Those were the eggs, you saw it yourself. No way he could have just put those back afterwards.
Hello, health champions. This is a very detailed cholesterol analysis of before and after I ate 100 eggs in 7 days. And I know the number one question on everyone's lips right now is, did the cholesterol go up? But if you have that question, that is...
Actually, my number one question is, did you actually eat those eggs? And is that even real blood work you have in your hands? But that works too.
the absolute wrong question. And if you clicked on this video just to find that out, I absolutely guarantee that you will completely miss the point of this video. So please don't skip ahead. I'm going to talk about 80%.
So he's going to do his classic video format where he presents you with some sort of clickbaity type of question, and then he just goes way off the rails talking about completely unrelated stuff, and then never really ties it into the main point. I'm thinking that's how this video is going to go.
About how cholesterol works and how they report it, because if you don't have those basics, then what happened to me will be completely and totally irrelevant. But if you stick with it, you're going to learn some things that could save your life. What we want to look at is the big picture and the
Here we go. We're going way off topic now.
balance between some key markers. So
Talking
I'm going
about
to
the
designate
universe.
with arrows if something stayed the same, if it got better, or if it got worse. So my total cholesterol went from 207 to 277.
So his cholesterol increased. All right.
So that is about the same. And now you're just saying,
How is that about the same? It's almost a third higher.
hey, this guy is totally crazy. 207 is not the same as 277. And yes, I can see that the number changed, but what I'm talking about is the risk factor, the total risk factor, and we're going to talk a lot about that. More isn't always better. Once you get up to 90 or 100, then it can be high for the wrong reasons. But if you're in the 50, 60, 70 range, then more is better.
I'm not that savvy on the different types of fats, so I guess maybe LDL is the bad kind and HDL is the good kind. Not really sure.
Also, you're going to start something, you need to know why and you need to understand at least most of.
So those arrows are his own interpretation of the data. Like according to him, these blue arrows are like, oh, no concern here, even though the numbers went up very significantly. In any context, this is statistically significantly more. Like we're talking like a third or a quarter more.
These markers and what they mean and how they relate. And we also want to understand that results can be skewed by events and complications.
Did he get beat up? Oh, okay, he's about to explain. He fell down the stairs or something.
That happen. So if on day 4 you run into some yellow jackets, or 3 of them, and you're highly sensitive, that can create an inflammatory cascade that can also skew the results. So I don't know if this influenced it, but we have to keep things like that in the back of our mind.
I'm gonna call that a no. Pretty sure that didn't affect it.
And we also need to understand the concept of margin of error, that if something just changes a couple of points, it really doesn't mean anything. So in this case, this is the same test, page 1 and page 3. It is the same blood draw. It was 6 vials taken from.
This looks fake. I can't really pin down why it seems so fake. It looks photoshopped. It looks like he photoshopped his name up on the top there. Which is interesting if he reported, oh, and he's flicking me off. It's interesting if he didn't really do it, which I kind of suspect may be the case, because that means he just got some random data that probably would look like if someone ate 15 whole eggs a day for 7 days. So he's assuming the case where he knows it increases your cholesterol.
From the same vein at the same time on 1012, and yet when they send it to 2 different departments, one to evaluate the NMR and one to do the regular lipid profile, we get 2 different results. So for this test on 1012, there's a 4% discrepancy in the cholesterol that they measured. And when they checked the triglycerides, there was even a 16% margin of error. And this is something they measure from the same blood sample. But if there's an error or margin of these numbers, then you're also going to have a margin of error on LDLs.
Sure, when you measure anything, there's a margin of error, but when you're looking at data over a period of time, you assume that the margin of error is consistent between both of the readings. You don't just say, oh, my cholesterol went up because this time I was on the upper end of the margin of error. It doesn't really work that way.
So in this particular case, there was an 8% error in the LDL. And then 8 days later, when I did it again, I'm not going to give you all those numbers, but we had 4% on the total, we had 1.5% error on the triglycerides, and we had a 4% error on the LDL. And if you came here to find out what happens if you eat 100 eggs in 7 days, then first we have to understand what is supposed to be a healthy cholesterol and what is really a healthy cholesterol. So first
I gotta hand it to him, he's actually staying a lot more on topic than he usually does.
of all, here is what's supposed to be. This is what we've been told, that there's different levels of cholesterol that range from dangerous to at risk to what's called heart healthy. When they quote these numbers, they often say that don't blame yourself because there's a lot of people with high cholesterol, but don't worry because we have medications that can get you from the danger zone into the heart healthy zone. But what if none of that is true? What if they got it completely wrong? And maybe instead of blaming yourself, you should celebrate your higher cholesterol. Now, please keep in mind, I'm not saying that higher is always better. You could be healthy with a high or a low cholesterol. You could be sick with a high or a low cholesterol. But let's start understand how this works. Let's take a look at what Nature has to say about it. It's the leading science journal in the world. And here's a study where they looked at the total cholesterol relation.
Here we go with the cherry picking data. You gotta find that one article that supports your narrative. That one single one from a reputable source.
Relationship to all-cause mortality, meaning they don't care what they died from. They just did a study and they saw how many people died and what were their cholesterol 10 years earlier. So this is what's called a prospective cohort. That means they measure the results first and then they look at the results later. So they have very little
Why is the picture in the background constantly going out of focus?
influence. When they measure it, they don't know who is going to end up doing what. So they did 12.8 million people.
He's actually standing in front of something presenting, like he didn't do this digitally. And the camera's going in and out of focus.
And this was basically everyone in Korea, every adult in Korea that came through their healthcare system. They recorded everybody for a period of time between 2001 and 2004. And then 10 years later, they followed up and they basically kept it really simple. They just saw how many people died and what were their cholesterol 10 years earlier. So 600.
Isn't that kind of not useful? Because, like, we know that there's specific types of mortality that are associated with total cholesterol. Why wouldn't you look at those, and why would you instead look at all of mortality? Oh, 20% of them died in car accidents. The cholesterol didn't matter then. Well, of course it didn't.
100,000 people died, which is kind of normal across the population. 5% of people died in 10 years. And then this was published in 2019, so it's relatively recent. Now let me break this down and make it simple for you. This graph shows the hazard ratio, the risk of dying with a baseline of 1. So if you get up to 2, that means you doubled your risk of death. And if we look at this from the highest level of cholesterol, where you have cholesterol of 300, we see that that increased the risk by 30%, whereas a very low cholesterol of 110, 120 increased your risk by 230%. So a low cholesterol is 8 times more dangerous than a high cholesterol. And I've had patients walk into the clinic with a cholesterol of 115 who were on a statin medication for many, many years. And when I asked them why,
Is there. This just seems like such non sequitur. I'm not sure why having the lowest cholesterol is associated with high mortality. Is it strictly based on this all-cause mortality study? Because it makes no sense to me.
are you on a
Like, is he gonna tie it in somehow and present some sort of theory as to why having low cholesterol is causing people to die?
statin? They said, well, the doctors think it's the best, just in case. So they're taking a toxic medication that interferes with the liver and get it down to a level where the risk of death is 8 times higher just from the cholesterol, not the medication itself. And what they call the danger zone over 240, anything over 200 is at risk or in danger, and that is where the curve is the lowest. That's the almost flat portion of the curve, where the lowest risk is what they call the danger zone. And if we blow up that portion of the graph a little bit, you can see that the curve is almost flat. You're going to increase your risk by 2 to 3% between 200 and 250.
This is some prime cherry picking of data. I'm impressed. He cherry picks data like a true scientist.
So that's kind of the ideal. But why is it then that there are all these other studies, you ask, that say for years that it's undoubtable, it's unquestionable,
Why is it then that this is the only correct data and the rest of it's all wrong?
that lower cholesterol is healthier? Well, you have to understand who pays for those studies and how are they conducted. So yes, they conform to very strict standards. They're called double-blind, placebo-controlled, and all that good stuff. But whoever pays for the study owns the study. And if they don't get the results that they were looking for, they're not going to publish that study. Why would you pay money and then get bad results and then tell everybody the bad results? It just doesn't work like that. So 9 out of 10 studies never get published. And the ones that do get published, they're not like super clear. It's like if you stand back far enough and you squint a little bit and you look at it sideways, then you could see that it's a little better, like a couple of % improvement here and there.
Yeah, kind of like looking at a study where they looked at all-cause mortality, meaning not just cholesterol-related mortality, and then graph that. And then you look at it and you're like, well, this graph doesn't actually make any sense. I see where you're coming from.
There is nothing really clear. And so if we go and we look at the little bit older people, 75 and up, and we look at men and women on the same graph, now we see that that curve flattens out even more. So even at a cholesterol of 300, we're seeing like an 8 to 10% increased risk. And part of this might be that higher cholesterol is very protective for the brain, that when people get older, they have much lower
Couldn't that also be explained by the fact that virtually everyone dies within that age range?
levels of dementia and neurological diseases if their cholesterol is a bit higher. So if we measure insulin, which I always do, and 99.9% of the time it's never done, then we find a reference range of 2.6 to 25, essentially. So a normal range is 2 to 5. 25 is called type 2 diabetes. It is called metabolic syndrome. It is called severe metabolic disease.
Here we go with the diabetes and insulin resistance. He always circles back to this on everything, no matter how unrelated it is. Even if you have cancer or something, it's linked to insulin resistance.
And mine, if you notice, was 2.9. That's typical for me. So a healthy thing is to have high total cholesterol, but low for the other metabolic markers. But this curve, like I said, is going to include a lot of people with type 2 diabetes, and those are
Oh, I see now where he got his individual conclusion that's not accepted by anyone reputable in the scientific community.
the people who are sick. Those are the people driving this curve up. So I would make a very strong case for the fact that if we actually didn't just measure total cholesterol, but we also asked who is a diabetic, and we took those people out of that curve, I am convinced that the curve would be virtually flat. And
So he's decided, based on this one singular study, that having a total level of high cholesterol is good. And it's more good the more you have it. And the only thing that's bad is when you have certain types of cholesterol.
And I don't think a cholesterol of 1,000 is necessarily good. And I don't know where it starts getting dangerous, but I know it is much, much higher than 300. I bet you've heard
Okay, well, at least he didn't say that it's as much as humanly possible.
a million times that LDL is the bad cholesterol. Well, that's not how it works, because the body makes LDL cholesterol, and your body wouldn't make something bad, trust me. However, if this LDL gets damaged by inflammation, then it shrinks.
Well, your body makes poop and pee. Is that bad?
If we have a lot of sugar, it causes glycation. If we have a lot of oxidative stress, like kind of rusting or inflammation, all those things shrink and damage the LDL particle, and that is the bad thing, not the LDL particle in itself. So in this test, called an NMR, they actually measure and count the LDL particles, and they measure their size. So they want the total number to be less than 1,000, and I went from 1491 to 1970. So by official standards, my numbers were sky high, but I'm not concerned, because if these are large and fluffy and undamaged, that represents no risk. So
How do you know if they're large and fluffy or not? You have to have a separate test to make sure.
what really matters is how many of the total particles have been damaged and shrunk and are now small. The body makes nice, fluffy, big LDL, and the damage that is harmful shrinks the LDL. So how many of the LDL are small? Well, the reference says less than 500 should be small. I went from 111 to 423. So I'm well below that number. And if we calculate a percentage, the reference says that up to 53% is okay. And I started out at 7.5, which
Okay, so they did measure it. So despite the fact that they have it broken down for you already, and they still maintain that over 1,000 total is bad, you in your own mind have decided that it's just fine.
is a very tiny fraction. It is basically bulletproof. And then I went to 21%. So how do we look at this? I'm not at all happy about going from excellent to slightly less good. So let's make sense of all of this. First of all, I do not recommend eating 100 eggs in 7 days. 15 eggs a day is not a lifestyle, it's a stunt. And I did it to get people's attention and hopefully be able to educate about how these markers really work.
Do you think he really did it? I remain unconvinced. I think he just got some generic data, someone else's report, and just photoshopped his name onto it.
And when you give your body so much of one type of food, very often you can upset your stomach a little bit. So 4 or 5 days into it, my stomach wasn't real happy. It was kind of rumbling and giving me some signs that this wasn't.
Really, Dr. Ekberg, eating whole eggs gave you inflammation? That's like turning all of your theories completely upside down. I thought you're only supposed to get inflammation when you eat Honey Nut Cheerios or a potato. This changes everything.
Such a great idea. So some of what happened, I think, is more of a shock to the system, kind of an overload. I also normally just eat once or twice a day, whereas now I had to eat basically 2 to 3 times to get all of this in, and that again can create some metabolic changes.
You went from eating twice a day to twice a day. It was rough.
But if we get back to summarizing and making some sense of these markers, my LDL particle count, it increased, but again, that in itself is not a bad thing. When we look at the milligram cholesterol, that went up, same thing, not a bad thing. So we're marking this off with arrows. So we have 2 markers, in my opinion, based on what we talked about in that Korean study, stays the same.
So he already had bad LDL to begin with. It's supposed to be 0 to 99, 136. Well, whoever's test this is.
Then my HDL cholesterol measured in milligrams improved significantly. That's an arrow up. My triglycerides stayed about the same. My total cholesterol, the number increased, but it's not a bad thing in itself. So we got 4 markers that basically did not change risk-wise. And
to be clear, those first 2 arrows are very clearly, they should be red down facing arrows. He's just making up that they're not red, based on one individual study that contradicts literally all of the other studies.
then the HDL particle count also improved significantly. So that's the second arrow.
And it contradicts them because it was based off of total mortality rate instead of cholesterol-based mortality. And who knows what the actual intent of the study was, but he probably took it out of context.
Up. Then we got to the 2 that I just discussed. The particle count for the LDL got worse. It increased the risk factor, and the LDL size also went to smaller, which indicates some inflammation. And again, when you overload, when you shock your system, that's not unusual. I would not actually ascribe that to the cholesterol or anything else in the eggs, but
So he's saying that just because he shocked his system by eating something different, that affected his cholesterol levels. Is that a thing? Like it's stress related? When you're stressed, do you just get magically more cholesterol or different cholesterol?
rather just doing a stupid stunt of shocking your body like that. And there's two more really interesting markers to complete the picture. The first one is TSH that went from 1.5 to 2.01. And if you notice, the range is 0.45 to 4.5. Again, that's way too big a range. A tenfold range is not normal human physiology. The sweet spot is about 1.8 to 3.
Are you basing that on anything?
And the middle of that is around 2.5. That's where you want to be. So if it's
No, he's just saying that. He's just saying that.
less than 1.8, that actually means that you're slightly hypothyroid. Homocysteine is probably the strongest independent risk factor for heart disease. It's a metabolite that the liver produces it, but then it converts it right back into something healthy, which is an amino acid called methionine, which then later turns into the body's main antioxidant called glutathione. But if you don't have enough B vitamins and methylation factors, those are just nutrients that help you convert. So you build up the homocysteine, but if you can convert it, then it goes right back into glutathione. But if you don't have enough, or if you don't use those nutrients efficiently, your homocysteine builds up.
Thanks, Wikipedia.
So my recommendation is don't eat 100 eggs in 7 days. Eat a few eggs a day if you enjoy them. They're a wonderful food, which I've talked about in some other videos. And learn enough to understand how cholesterol work, and then share that knowledge and share that video, because this can save a life. Don't let people have a perfect metabolism and a healthy cholesterol of 250 and get on a medication for all the wrong reasons. If you enjoyed this,
So the main take home was his non sequitur from that study where the bottom of the graph showed that, and for no explained reason, that having very low cholesterol leads to mortality. He never even attempted to explain why that might be the case. And then he just said, oh, don't let your doctors put you on the medication. I feel like this is just kind of dangerous. Like, I don't generally knock the hustle here. Like, he's full of crap, and he's not really a doctor, and he's just telling people a bunch of crap on the internet. But, like, this is giving people dangerous advice. And I'll bet a lot of his, like, I've looked through his comment sections before. I'm going to go through right now and read some of them. His main viewers are people who are overweight and are being told by their doctors that they have to cut the saturated fat and start eating like a bowl of oatmeal once in a while. And then they come over to his channel and they get confirmation bias. I am 80 years old, and for the last 15 years, I normally have eaten from 30 to 60 eggs per week. Sure you have. Since I am allergic to doctors, hospitals, and clinics, I have no idea what my cholesterol numbers are. Classic example of the type of person listening to his advice. Up until 5 years ago, I was operating a wood miser sawmill out in the weather of Panama until I had an accident and destroyed my knee. But this sedentary lifestyle will probably kill me before I need to worry about my cholesterol. Okay. So if this person's admitting that they're obese and they're probably going to die of obesity related diseases, but it ain't that cholesterol, that doctor can forget about his advice and let me eat my bacon in peace. The pharmaceutical industry has gotten doctors to continually lower cholesterol levels over the years so they can push more of the drugs. The levels for our great and grandparents was much higher and there was less heart disease. Once again, we are being manipulated. Thank you so much for your channel. So glad I tripped over it. I'm here to stay. I learned so much. In goes the bacon. Yeah, bunch of crap. Anyway, until next time, enjoy the bacon.